stealing the plants' water because I'm thirsty and I ran out of the house too fast.
Do it.
I hope that's recorded. Leave it to me. Hello, warriors. Welcome to season 2 of the Invisible Diaries. We're your hosts. I'm Misty.
And I'm Amber, and today we have a great topic to discuss with you.
But first, a quick disclaimer. Any information discussed in this podcast is strictly our opinion and for informational purposes only. It is not meant as medical advice and should not be taken that way. Always consult with your doctor or medical team.
We know battling chronic illness can be hard, and if you find yourself or someone you love in crisis and need someone to talk to, you can call the National Suicide Support Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK, which provides free and confidential support in the U.S. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Again, that number is 1-800-273-TALK.
Any resources mentioned on this episode will be linked on our website, theinvisibleidiaries.com. Now let's get started.
So there are two sides to every coin, and dealing with chronic illness is no different. We are going to be focusing on dealing with the disappointment that goes along with confirming a diagnosis, but also when diagnostic results come back normal or inconclusive, and what to do next.
Yes, I love this topic because a lot of us are either are still in that position or we've been through it. So I think it's a great discussion to have.
The first scenario is dealing with getting answers. Some questions to consider. Was it the diagnosis that you were expecting, or were you completely caught off guard? I don't know about you, Misty, but I've gone to the doctor several times with thinking that I'm going to, I've done my research and I've pinpointed some things, and I'm not a medical doctor.
Yeah, you come prepared.
Sometimes, you just feel like, okay, it's got to be at least in this direction, and then it's not. Yeah. So I don't know about you, like, have you gone to appointments and you're expecting it, and then, your expectations are then confirmed?
Oh, yeah. So for me, diagnosis takes a long time. We're going to go over that at some point. And so, of course, this happens because you always go in thinking like, maybe I'm going to get that answer today. Right. And that can take years for a lot of us. And so, we go in, we either freeze, or sometimes you're maybe not with the right doctor who's quite as compassionate, or maybe that's just not their specialty. So, when you're expecting to get some type of answer and they don't have it, it happens so many times to most of us. And so that's why I love this topic, because, let's get real. A lot of times we're going to go and we're not going to get the answers. We're going to get that see you in 3 to 6 months, and then it just is an ongoing drag.
Absolutely. Well, and something to think about too is if you were expecting it, when you leave the office, were you feeling overwhelmed with the information? So, okay, you finally got that confirmation, and now it's like, now what? Now you're probably referred to another specialist so that you can start a treatment plan with that specialist. Do you feel like you left with enough tools to make the next decision? Sometimes you get a diagnosis and then it's like, all right, great, see you next year when we follow up.
Yeah.
So that's something to consider too. I think the important thing to remember here is that you're always allowed to pause and take a moment. So, unless it's an emergency situation, a lot of times, because we're so, we're either waiting to get in with the specialist for so long, or we're so overwhelmed with the amount of information that we don't allow ourselves time to process.
True.
And sometimes, you're waiting to get into the next specialist, but I think it's important to remember that you can pause and that you can digest.
Yeah. I've had to do that before, where I've just taken a breather, where, sometimes I get really motivated about my health. I'm like, I'm going to get on top of this, and I have all these appointments, and I'm like really good about it. And then sometimes I'll just get to that frustrated point where I have to kind of just shut things off for a minute, just not even think about it, even though I know it's there and I know I need to make this, progress somehow, some way, and just, take a break. I think it's always important to take a break because it gets overwhelming.
Yeah, and part of, we talk about, self-care a lot on our platforms, because that is the other aspect. It's, getting a diagnosis, or maybe you didn't get a diagnosis, but it's important to kind of go, well, how am I feeling? Am I feeling angry or disappointed that I didn't walk away with, you know, an answer, or am I feeling angry or disappointed because I did get an answer and now I'm overwhelmed with the emotions that go with that because I haven't even had a chance to, you know, even really process. So I think it's important to recognize that the disappointment can happen either on the side of, okay, now I'm still trying to figure out what this is, or on the flip side of, now I have an answer and
very true.
What's next?
And I know for me, when I was going through my diagnosis, you know, you always want to keep in mind that 1 in 20 are misdiagnosed. That's a high number.
Crazy.
That's pretty crazy. So, and I know for me, when I was going through the process, at first I was dismissed forever. So, you know, we're working on a book, for those of you that don't know that, and we're going to kind of go over how to advocate for yourself and touch more on this when our book comes out, kind of like a guide. But anyway, so before we have this guide, you know, going to see my doctors and being dismissed, I finally you know, went through my blood work. I highlighted all the consistencies over the years. I put it all together, and I literally like went in, I slapped it down to my doctor who was trying to send me home again, and I was like, this is not anxiety. If I had anxiety, then my blood work, if it's just that, my blood work wouldn't look crazy like this.
Right.
And at that point, I kind of started a second, like a page where I put down the potential or possibilities of things that I could have, from Lyme disease, autoimmune, all of these things, so we can kind of start crossing them out. And I told my doctor, I was like, listen, I want to rule these things out. And she finally kind of listened to me. But, you know, there's a lot of categories I almost fit in. Like, I technically was, you know, right there for lupus. I had the elevated C4, I had all of the criteria. You know, it was just on the very end of the spectrum. So it wasn't quite like, if my points were a little more crazy, then it would have been like, for sure that you have lupus. But because it was all on the very low end of that spectrum, they didn't want to give me that diagnosis. So, you know, for a while I kind of held on to that. I was like, that fits. And I think that's a problem that a lot of us get sometimes, is that we're so desperate to find that answer that it's like we just want it so bad. And so it's really about being patient, because, you know, I'm glad I didn't just kind of hold on to that, and that I kept digging and digging and crossing things out. And maybe that one wasn't crossed out quite yet, but it's a freaking process.
It is, and I think that that's why, you know, talking about disappointment and just that feeling alone, I think that it's important to be able to say, like, you know, yes, I'm disappointed that I got a diagnosis, because now I know what comes next with, you know, XYZ and treatment, or now I have to figure out what my next plan is with a whole new doctor. I have to start building this trust. Yeah. Or, you know, I'm so desperate to find an answer, and now I still don't have an answer. And I think a lot of us feel like we owe our friends and family an explanation.
We want to validate it.
Exactly. And so I think that sometimes just that side of things, you know, we don't let ourselves feel it, because it's like, it's okay to feel disappointed. I mean, you encourage your children when they're disappointed, or your friends when they're disappointed, but I don't think we give ourselves that same kind of grace. So
that's a good point. I agree. I know when I first did get my official diagnosis with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, you know, I thought like I would be relieved to finally have that official thing. But like you said, you know, even still, there was disappointment in that, because it was like, okay, well, there's no cure for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and it doesn't like necessarily just magically get better. And so it was like I had to really, even though I knew, and it was like I finally had the official diagnosis, but I knew that was, you know, it was going to be that at that point. I just needed to confirm it, but it still was hard, because it was like, damn. Right.
Well, now you're at the end of that road after all of that searching, and so it's like, okay, this is my monster. This is, you know. But
I still get in denial a lot, and there's still so many times where I'll go to the doctor and I'm like, do some blood work. Like, there's something else. There's something that has to be a way I can have relief.
Yeah. Well, and I think because we have to advocate so much for ourselves, we become, you know, sleuths for our own health. Yeah. And so many of these diseases do overlap symptomology wise, like so many of them overlap. And so, you know, it's okay to take that disappointment and regroup.
I think taking a break is really valuable, because, you know, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of stress, it's a lot of time, and you know, just being disheartened and frustrated. It's hard, and so sometimes it is, you know, maybe it's not productive, but it is important to give yourself a breather.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, again, no one's going to care about your health the way that you do. So, you know, taking that time for yourself is just as important as racing off. All right, now I know it, so now I'm going to do this, 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 and this. And it's a rabbit hole for sure, but I just don't think we allow ourselves enough time to be like, okay, this is what I'm feeling, and it's okay.
Yeah.
So, what do you think disappointment really means as far as like from your perspective now that you have a diagnosis? Because we're kind of on those flip sides where I have a few, but I'm still searching for my big one. You kind of, I mean, you have other, and you're on the flip side, like you have your big one, but you know you have other stuff going on.
Yeah, so my geneticist said he thinks I have some type of rare cardiac disorder, and so I would say a big part of what I'm experiencing, what I've been experiencing for a while, is denial. I mean, I have my test at home to do the genetic testing, and it's been like 6 months, to be honest. And part of it is because, you know, I lost my dad, and he wanted me, before that happened, he wanted me to try to get a sample from them too, just to have all the information. And you know, obviously I can't get one from my dad, but I can from my mother. But I don't know why. I don't know what it is that I keep pushing that off, because, you know, he even said too, he's like, well, when you do that whole, you know, genome, like you might find stuff you don't want to see.
Sure.
And I really do want that definitive answer, but I don't know why. Like,
but like, are you prepared for everything that goes with that?
I need to, and I want to.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. It's like having, you know, weight around your ankles, and like you just can't.
Right, but it's
I
like
don't know.
But it's like you said, even with finding out you had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, you know, there is no cure.
Right.
So, you know, and obviously everybody's quality of life is very different. So sometimes that is the side of you know, it's like, okay, I have a definitive answer, but now I'm disappointed because there's nowhere to go from here other than trying to have the best possible, which
I plan to do it. Like, I literally, like, every morning, because you're supposed to do it like in the morning before you eat, and every morning I look at it, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do, like, I need to do that. I'll put it in my calendar if I get mad at myself, and I don't know why. So I'm gonna do it. I really want to. I think it'd be great information, and you know, being in school for biomedical, like, I think it's interesting.
I'm super fascinated. You know?
So I will do it. I don't know what it is. So again, with the denial thing, you know, like I was saying before, there's so many times where I just feel so defeated that I will be like, hey, I've had blood work in a while. Like, I'm like hoping and praying that I have some type of, you know, potassium deficiency, that I can just take a pill and like feel better.
Right.
Because I want to feel better. And like my blood work, because I eat so clean now, and you know, I have like a pretty healthy diet, and changed a lot of stuff with my lifestyle, and so it usually comes back really well.
Right.
Like, my blood work's great, and it's like I just want something to be off so I can fix that and feel better.
Right.
And I think that's where that whole denial thing comes in, that it's just, you know, yes, I'm great to have a diagnosis, but I mean, it also sucks. Because
right. The flip side for me is, because I'm still searching so much, that every single time I'm like, okay, I think this is it, and then it's not that. And I'm kind of in the same boat where it's like I have the next appointment to do, and I'm like, you know, now I'm like, oh, I'll focus on my son because his health is more important than mine. Which is ludicrous, because we talk about how taking care of yourself is the most important thing to do. So I totally get what you're saying, because I'm doing the same thing with myself, where I'm like, okay, I can push myself through this. I can keep doing all the things I have control over, you know, getting enough sleep, and, you know, eating enough kale.
doing the yoga. No, it makes sense. And, you know, there's a quote from my friend Kendra that she said years ago, when I was dealing with the potential lupus diagnosis. She has lupus, and I remember her saying, finding the right physician is like dating. Like, you're gonna date a couple not so good ones until you find the right one. And it's so true. You know, because that's a lot of times, I think, why this quest takes so long, is because we're not always with the right physicians, and you get that referral to go to this person. And, you know, even for me, when I was seeing the neurologist, He specialized in seizures, and I was there for autonomic dysfunction.
Right.
He didn't know anything about that, you know, and he kept trying to fit me into that mold. And he even offered me, he was like, why not just try the seizure meds and just see if they work? And I'm like, I'm not having seizures. I can print it out, you know, from the Dysautonomia International and the Ehlers-Danlos, like I printed out information and gave to him. I'm like, here you go, here's your homework, read up on this.
Right.
He's like, oh yeah, I've heard of those people. And
That's so interesting, because that was one of the things that I was tested for last year by the neurologist, was epilepsy.
Because that's their specialty.
So interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously my EEG was mostly normal, so it wasn't.
Yeah, mine was a little slow. And I did pass out after. When I was walking down the hall, I passed out, but I had the heart monitor on.
Wow.
And that's kind of how they figured out the dysautonomia, because that's what happened. My nervous system, everything just, my brain
crashed.
signals, and I'm like, here I'm having this episode in your hallway.
Yeah.
And they called the cardiologist. It's a gray area.
Sure.
And so, but it's not their specialty. So sometimes I like to, because I do hair, I like to relate the hair industry to the doctor world, right? And, you know, maybe all hairstylists can do perms. They learned it in school. They had a little segment, but do all hairstylists do perms? Like, are they all specialists in it? No. So as far as like seeing a doctor goes, you might see a neurologist who specializes in migraines and epilepsy, but they might not specialize in something a little more unique. So you really want to find somebody who is going to specialize in that specific thing. We do have a resources page on our website for those of you who don't know. It's a little bit short right now, so if you want to help us out and you see like an amazing doctor for your rare thing or whatever, then feel free to shoot us an email at theinvisibleidiaries@gmail.com and say, hey, my doctor's not on there, but they're really great at this, and we'll put them up there, which can hopefully help other people.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, and like we had said before, we are on the opposite ends of the coin. We are the flip side of the coin, you know, where you have named your big monster and I'm over here still trying to find mine. So let's talk a little bit, before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about what the disappointment feels like from those perspectives. So for you, you've got your big monster, but now you've also maybe have potential
baby monster.
Baby monster. You know, so what are some of the feelings that go along with that? You know, like, okay, I know I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
And now I know I have, you know, you also have your other syndrome with your heart, the Wolff-Parkinson? No.
Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome.
WPW.
Yeah.
That's pretty rare too, right?
It is.
Yeah.
And so that is also why I believe it took so long to get the Ehlers-Danlos diagnosis, because that's two rare things. And you have some doctors, like my geneticist, who said, hey, Misty, it's very possible to have two rare things. And then you also have like my cardiologist that I had for 10 years who says, yeah, it's not likely you're going to have two rare things. So you have literally like contradicting views. Yeah. And so I feel like, honestly, she made it so hard for me. I was with her for 10 years. I trusted her. I feel that she neglected my health. I should have had a pacemaker 10 years prior to when I did, but she was not convinced, which I have a whole blog post called I'm Not Convinced, inspired by her. And yeah, so I mean, sometimes you just have that doctor who kind of gets in the way of getting your diagnosis, you know.
Do you think that you felt more disappointed once you found out you did have this other rare cardiac syndrome, knowing that you were dismissed for so long, you know, even though you were like, something's wrong?
Yes. It was a big letdown because they were so hyper focused on that. So when my heart valve, my aortic valve started to deteriorate and it was leaking, and I eventually had that open heart surgery to get it repaired. For years, they ignored it. I would go in to the ER all these times saying like, I'm short of breath, I don't feel right. And because I wasn't in that SVT, my heart rate wasn't crazy, they would just dismiss me. And they were like, well, you're not having SVT, which is, you know, what you have from the WPW. And so they were like, you're good. And they would send me home. Your blood work looks fine. You're good. No one ever did an echo. No one ever looked deeper. And so that happened for years. And then finally, you know, this the ER doctor was like, okay, we're gonna send you home. I see, I hear your murmur, but it's nothing different than what you've been experiencing this whole time, and you're not an SVT. So, and I go, whoa, 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 whoa. I've never heard that I had a murmur.
And he was,
and he was like, let me see your chart. So he starts looking through my chart, and he was like, huh, you're right. I don't see it anywhere in your chart, because I was a frequent flyer. So he did an echo. And finally I got that dang echo, and I had severe aortic insufficiency.
Wow.
So, I was going in to the point where, and another thing that goes with like the WPW and a specific gene that I researched with that is that eventually, because I was an SVT my whole freaking life, and that was another thing I'd bring up to them all the time too, like, isn't that going to have some type of effect?
Long-term effect?
No. Well, it's funny because like I watch like Grey's Anatomy, and when they're in SVT they bring out the paddles. I was like, I was in SVT all the time,
right.
Every day. And so yes, it does have long-term effects, by the way, we learned, and it messes with your sinus node, and eventually I started having bradycardia. And so at the end of the day, like it was just, it's frustrating that she and them, all of them,
right.
they didn't look out for me. They were supposed to have my back, and they focused on the arrhythmia, and they ignored the long-term effects. They ignored things that could possibly be going wrong with that. And so I got stuck with just that. No one believed that anything bigger could be going on or additional to that.
Yeah.
And
do you feel like you're more disappointed now that you have a diagnosis, or do you think that you're less disappointed?
I don't know, a little bit of both, I guess. Like, I'm disappointed in the way that like I want to fax that to all my doctors. Like,
right.
That's part of why we do this, is because I want to educate those people. I want to educate my doctors.
Yeah.
I'm so bratty that I did a research paper, like a medical journal type paper on a gene that's linked to WPW, and I faxed it to my old doctors last week.
But I think it's amazing because it's, it's not here to be right or wrong. I think doctors are in an incredibly tough position, because especially with these, autoimmune disorders and diseases that are coming up. I mean, it's incredibly hard. We know how hard it is to get a diagnosis from our end, and we're in our body. We know it, and sometimes
right.
It's hard to articulate, especially when doctors are so used to relying on diagnostics as a tool, as the main tool. So when you're saying, oh, I'm experiencing this, but the diagnostics don't always match, or they're not knowing exactly what to look for, like in your case, I think it's not to try to be a jerk back to the doctors, because we're super grateful. There are amazing doctors out there, but there are physicians out there that do seem to get very pigeonholed.
They can be closed-minded.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that is one of our missions, to be like, hey guys,
I'm grateful for the amazing doctors who have helped me, but I also am very disappointed in the doctors who neglected me, and that's the way I see it. She neglected me.
Absolutely.
Those ER doctors neglected me. I was young, I mean, in my medical records, there's reports of, I remember my heart rate being in the low 30s. It was like 30 to 33.
Wow.
And they kept going in there waking me up. I was in for a headache, not because of my heart. And they're like, are you okay? But because I was like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm just tired. No biggie.
That's
it's late.
incredible.
And they were like, okay. And it's all in my chart. And they just were like, well, it's not bothering her. So they sent me home. That was like 10 years prior to my pacemaker.
Wow.
And it's all over. It's not just that time, it's like all over, and they just let it go.
Yeah.
So I'm disappointed about that, for sure.
And I think that's the other flip side for me, is that, I'm going to these physicians and these specialists, and I'm like, okay, this one's going to be able to help me. Mm-hmm. This one's going to be able to sort through all of this information and tell me this is what's wrong with you, so that I can start to come up with a game plan. And so for me, the disappointment that I feel is that I put so much hope in going to a specialist, and when I don't get an answer, and it's like, sorry, something's very wrong, but we don't know what, and we're not even sure. Yeah, we're not even sure which direction to point you in, so I'm gonna send you to this doctor over in this town. And
it's like pushed around. I do appreciate that though. Like, I would much rather a doctor be honest and just say, hey, this is outside of my scope, and And I even wrote a blog post a while back. I might redo it and post it on the Invisible Diaries, but it was called Why I Go Out of State to See a Doctor.
Right.
Because, when you don't have a team of specialists that you know, they've studied and specialized in a specific rare or interesting, whatever you want to call it, monster. Sometimes you have to go out of state into some type of specialty clinic that actually specializes in that.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, allowing myself to be like, okay, I am disappointed, because you want doctors to have the answers.
Yeah.
And they are human beings that are working within their capabilities. So I think sometimes we make them more of a superhero, and it's an unfair pedestal that we put them on.
True.
Because they are, you know, just like us.
Just be
They went to
honest
school,
and say, like,
Exactly.
you know, it. I know maybe for me, like, some of the times were a little bit different back then because it was a long time ago.
Sure.
But, you know, I still hear about it. We hear about it all the time.
Yeah.
From people who listen to our podcast or who are on Instagram.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people have to deal with this kind of disappointment.
Yeah.
So,
and that's really the main reason we wanted to kind of touch base on this today, is just to let you know that it's okay.
Yeah, and
Either
you're not
way.
alone.
Yeah, there is no right way to do any of this other than allowing yourself to feel whatever you feel.
Yeah.
Because everybody's going to be different, and you're going to go through different moments.
Absolutely.
Or sometimes you're feeling more disappointment with the doctor, and sometimes more disappointment with yourself. So,
Yeah.
or no matter what, we just want to remind you guys it's okay.
Definitely.
Anything else that you'd like to add?
When discussing disappointment in regards to chronic illness, we have a full table of different plates. And from our diagnosis journey to the way our body holds us back. So
Yeah, no, it's
basically just trying to constantly adjust and reinvent yourself whenever you're dealing with these setbacks. I try to think of it more in a glamorous way, like Madonna. Like, you know, we might not be who we were, whether it's a week ago, a year ago, 10 years ago, because of our chronic illness. So, you know, trying to figure that out and trying to process that and deal with it and in a way, like, embrace it. So managing mental health really is, like, key, and that's what, to me, is most important. You know, is to have that self-care and to take care of yourself while dealing with a disappointment, because it can be a very dark place. It can be very depressing.
Yeah, and you need to be able to unpack those emotions.
Definitely.
And those feelings. So, I mean, some of the things that I do, I journal a lot. I'm a huge advocate for journaling and just getting it out, and, you know, on paper, talking to trusted friends and, you know, therapists. I'm a huge advocate for therapies. Misty and I both are. So I think that, you know, acknowledging and then dealing with it in the best, most healthiest, safest way.
Yeah.
So whatever that is for you, because everybody's different. Some people work out, some people internalize.
I wanted to say too, one of our awesome followers who comments on a lot of our stuff, like, it's so fun getting to know everybody, but she had made it a point. I made a self-care post on my personal one, and she commented about how for her self-care for her, she thought was like going to the doctors. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can see how a lot of people consider, like, oh, I'm doing self-care, I'm seeing the doctor.
Taking care of myself.
But it can be a stressful thing, like we have been discussing, full of disappointment. And so, you know, make sure that your self-care is not just going to see your doctor. Like,
there's follow-up. Yeah.
Yes, like, you know, which we always discuss self-care and some ideas for that, but just finding a way. Self-care to me is an escape from the stress.
Right.
Whether it's from getting a pedicure or walking, you know, out to going on a walk outside, or just, you know, turning your phone off, locking the door, playing some music. Like, that is self-care.
Absolutely. And that's something that's so individual, just like these diseases and syndromes and symptoms and illnesses. I mean, everything is very personal, so it's just making sure you don't keep bottling it up. That's the big thing. And Misty and I are going to be talking, we've got some mental health episodes coming up, so make sure you guys stay tuned for that, because it's important to talk about what happens after. You know, after the diagnosis, or after the, you know, another letdown of not getting a diagnosis. So
yeah, and we definitely will go over that more in depth, but for sure, self-care, it has to go hand in hand with disappointment, so you don't stay in this dark place, and so that you have some type of relief or escape from that.
100%. So you guys, thank you so much for listening and for taking the time to follow us. Don't forget,
follow us on Facebook.
We just ask that you guys, we know we're like a broken record, but please leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on. because it just helps other people find us and helps us spread the word, because that's our goal. It's to reach as many people as possible so they feel a little less alone.
Yeah.
If you're not already following us on our Instagram, you can find us at The Invisible Diaries. You can give us a shout out, send us a love email at theinvisibleidiaries@gmail.com.
Yes, that's the one.
Or we also have a Facebook support group. Misty, do you want to tell them about that one?
Yeah, so I mean, if you just type in The Invisible Diaries, it should pull up our Facebook page and it should pull up the group. If not, once in a while we will post it on our Facebook page. I think the link is even on our Instagram link page. So,
and if not, we'll re-add it.
Yeah, or ask us, like, hey, I can't find it. We will tell you.
Yeah.
Our Facebook world we're trying to build still, so the more people that join, the better, because then we have more people to support each other.
Absolutely.
So with the Facebook group, it gives you a little bit more of a space to talk and communicate, whereas Instagram is kind of like commenting and liking.
Yeah.
But in the post, you can kind of directly say like, hey, does anybody else have this certain issue? And then you can meet new friends that way.
And just a reminder, our Facebook community group is closed, so you do have to answer a couple of questions because we just want to honor everyone's privacy.
Right.
So just, you know, if that it's meant to be a support page that's a little bit more private.
Yeah, so let's build that, and we need your help.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good. I'm waving to the mic. Bye.
Make sure you're following us on Instagram and Facebook for the latest updates, and subscribe to our website, theinvisibleidiaries.com, where you'll find all the details from today's podcast as well as other amazing resources. You can also check out our digital magazine.